This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
The MCDM RPG, as it is apparently officially titled.
For it to have hit 2 million in under 24 hours is mind-boggling.
Kickstarter is not a pre-order.
The mods shut down any conversation about Ben Byrne.
Really?
We got to talk about naming conventions. I, for a very long time, have been keeping a list of Wizards of the Coast adventure names and complaints about them.
Enchanting Emporiums, now on Kickstarter if you want to play 5e. Quest into the Infinite Staircase, which is an anthology.
These sort of classic old tournament adventures fell way out of fashion. Maybe now's the time to bring them back.
Is it really the time to bring them back? I don't think I've seen anything that indicates to me that it's the time to bring them back is the thing.
A big cup of all of that and more right now.
Okay, all right, gonna get my knee around the microphone. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 podcast in this and all the realms. I'm Dael Kingsmill, and I'm here, as always, with James Hake, Shawn Moen, and Ben Byrne. Benjamin, I am asking you a question that I'm coming up with very ahead of time. It's, what is your favorite color?
Blue.
No, yellow!
I have a feeling the question is something like Kickstarters and such on products. What is the most that you have ever spent? You don't have to tell us the amount, but what is it that you purchased with your hard-earned money? You have dollars in Australia, right? And
Dollary dudes.
dollary
Ben and
dues.
I had a whole conversation with an Uber driver where he insisted that Australia didn't use dollar. Or no, he insisted that we used American dollars and that dollar always meant US dollars.
Yes.
Whoa.
Yes, I do remember that. Because I think there are some countries that do just use US dollars, right? I think that's maybe where he was coming from. Yeah, me too. That's for sure. The most I have ever spent on a Kickstarter. I do this regularly. It's bad, and it's actually not on tabletop RPG Kickstarters. It's on typically board game Kickstarters because I'm a miniatures fiend. That's where I get my juice from. That's what I love. I love my miniatures. Oh boy, love the miniatures. Just love the little man on the table. Anyway, so I regularly spend in excess of hundreds of dollars. Penny's broken. Yes, that is true. On most recently, Mythic Battles Ragnarok just arrived, which I'm very excited about to use those. I'm never going to play the board game, but I'm really excited to use those miniatures for a campaign of the Saga of the Seasons from Valican Clans. And let me tell you, the Fenrir miniature is beautiful. Dael, I have to ask you this though. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but the miniature Fenrir has a sword like driven through his snout.
It is not technically mythologically accurate. Fenrir is killed because what's his face? What's his name? The son of Odin, not Thor. He grabs
Siggy?
No. I'll know it if I hear it.
I read this recently, but they're all the names are melting together.
I should know. Come on now.
Not Baldur, surely.
No, he's dead.
No, Tyr gets his hand bitten off by Fenrir.
Who is it?
Vidar?
It might be Vita.
Vali?
No, it'll be Vita. Of those
Loki.
two? Okay.
Heimdall.
Welcome to our podcast where we list all the sons of Odin and some other people. He basically grabs
Gulvig.
each jaw, bottom jaw, upper jaw, and tears Fenrir in half, which is pretty sick. I think slightly sicker than a sword through the snout. But the snout is cool too. I mean, maybe he did get a sword through the snout, but that's not how he died.
Yeah, maybe. What about you, Dael? Do you tend to spend big on Kickstarters?
Oh no.
Or even just like a collector's edition product or something?
This is I call myself Silas Mana on the regular. I am a miser. I keep my money. I count my money. And I really don't tend to spend very often. But when I do spend, I spend big. But rarely on Kickstarters. I'm fairly conservative with my crowdfunding. I am the crowd element of the crowdfunding, as it were.
I had this conversation recently with a friend of mine who was like, why do you spend so much money? You could get a deposit for a house. I was like, no, I can't. No, I can't. If I had any hope of getting a deposit for a house, maybe I would spend less money. But because that is not a possibility, then screw it. I may as well be happy in my poverty. James Hake, what about yourself?
I went to look at my list of pledges and I was surprised. I have never spent more than $125 on a Kickstarter, which, looking at some of the Kickstarters I've backed, shows an incredible amount of restraint on my part. So number 2 is Avatar Legends, which I think is the one I care most about. I spent about 115 on that. Great game. But the other one at 100 British pounds, which is about $125 US, is Break! 2 exclamation points, a TTRPG inspired by fantasy video games and anime, which I keep getting updates for. I don't know if it's out yet. I kind of supported it on a love of its ethos, and then I got distracted by D&D, which maybe says a lot about the way that TTRPGs go.
That's fair. Shawn Moon, what about your fine self?
When James said Break, I thought it was going to be like Breaking 2 Electric Boogaloo, the role-playing game. And I was like, where can I get myself some of that? But my level of miserliness makes Dael look like a drunken sailor on leave. So aside from Ghostfire Gaming, I've backed very few Kickstarters. I will buy a lot of products, but the one I've backed that I spent the most on was the Shadow of the Weird Wizard, the game from Rob Schwalb. So that's out there, waiting patiently. What I noticed, though, as I was looking through the list of things I have kickstarted is, boy, nobody fulfills theirs on time. And that's okay. I don't, but I see some of the complaints from customers about like being like 2 weeks overdue. And I'm like,
right.
There are like 25 I'm looking at right now that were like 2 years overdue and still haven't fulfilled. And that's okay. That's okay. I'm okay with that.
Yeah. It's a tricky business, as folk say. Kickstarter's not a pre-order, in theory. It is because you believe in the project.
I've looked up some answers. So it was Vida, and there are different versions. So it seems like in the Voluspa, we're expecting Vida to drive a sword through the heart of Fenrir, avenging his father. But here in Gylfaginning, apparently Odin's son Vida will move forward and kick one foot into the lower jaw of the wolf. This foot will bear a legendary shoe, for which the material has been collected throughout all of time. With one hand, Vida will take hold of the wolf's upper jaw and tear apart his mouth, killing Fenrir. So there you go.
Yeah, speaking of crowdfunders that are doing extremely well, we don't tend to talk about crowdfunding campaigns that are in flight on the Lorecast unless it's a Ghostfire one, because full disclosure, this podcast is funded by Ghostfire Gaming. Enchanting Emporium's now on Kickstarter if you want to play 5e. But this is not just record breaking. The MCDM RPG, as it is apparently officially titled, is breaking records on like the second day of its crowdfunding. It is
on the first
when
day.
I last checked on the first day for that record. Yeah. When I last checked, I actually last checked yesterday, so I don't know if anybody's going to update me on this, but it was on 2.8 million. And for context, the biggest tabletop RPG Kickstarters before that, to my understanding, is Crooked Moon, which was earlier this year at 4 million, and Ryoko's Guide, which was 3.3 million total funding, which is still huge for those projects. But for the MCDM to be at probably over 3 million by this point, by its third or fourth day, is really cool.
It's still not cracked 2.9 as of this recording. But for it to have hit 2 million in under 24 hours is mind-boggling. and like huge props to them. Like, doggone.
Yeah.
It is a backer kit campaign, not a Kickstarter campaign. So if you go to Kickstarter, you won't find it.
I also feel like I mean, I could be wrong about this, but the last I knew, the name is still not decided. I don't believe it's going to be called MCDM RPG. They could.
That is correct. I joked at Matt on Twitter about this, and he said it named TBA.
I wonder, though, if they might, Tales of the Valiant themselves, if they give it a more proper name now, right? Like, we still refer to Tales of the Valiant as Black Flag. And Tales of the Valiant feels like it has less kind of SEO recognition than putting Black Flag into a...
well, I will say I think the difference there is that if people do continue to call it MCDM RPG after they've released, it won't matter. Like, it'll still lead them to the same place. It'll still be good for SEO. It'll still, translate into conversions. So I think that they're in a pretty good place, even if it is odd to have not picked a name yet. But I mean, I got to say, so I recently ran a Q&A for the MCDM patrons where, just translating their questions to Matt and Intricasso regarding the game and the design and where we are. And the number of questions that were, what's the game going to be called? I got to the point where I was keeping track of them and I was coming up with a fake name for each time someone asked the question. I was going to genuinely be like, oh, I can field this. The game's name is Lemon Zest Zero. Like, so
the zero calorie RPG.
LZ Zero for short.
Yeah, my point is that I should be allowed to name the game.
I think, Matt, if you're listening, you should let Dael name the game. Just let her do it.
Mm-hmm.
Just let me do it.
Just as a bit.
You got to commit to the bit. Actually, worth mentioning as well that during that Q&A, you got to mention, Ben, you and your hatred for the negotiation systems. Not for me. Intricasso brought it up. You've made your impression on the MCDM community.
So I was my flight from Philadelphia back to LA. I was on the same flight as James Intricasso. I didn't see him, but he spotted me. I must have walked past his chair. And so he messaged me on Twitter, which I didn't get until I turned my phone back on at the end of the flight. And let me just say, I was thrilled to bits that I'm on speaking terms with James Intricasso. I said to him I would have offered to grab a coffee, but I had to run to my next flight to get flown to Sydney. I'm glad that I've made an impact. I've heard that negotiations are still being included as part of the system. Have you, Dael, been able, or has anybody here been able to play the system since our run through at PAX Oz or Shawn playing it at Game HoltCon?
No, not yet. Although Roman has been kindly keeping me in the loop on other playtests that are happening. I've just been slammed with other stuff. So not at this point, unfortunately.
Fair enough. I do want to say as well, I've been meaning to say this, and I don't know whether this is going to come off as a bit gauche. I do apologize. Our comment section on that episode of the Lorecast led me to believe I went maybe a little too far with what was intended to be light ribbing.
You should have seen the MCDM Discord.
Oh, really?
They took it well, I assume.
Look, was never. I can't stand negotiations. I stand by the fact that I don't think that's a fun system in the version that I played at PAX Australia. But I apologize if I went overboard with the tone at which I took to.
Yeah.
Pardon me.
You should see what their $3 million stretch goal is, Ben. It's not good for you.
I'm sure they're wiping away their tears at what I said about negotiations with their millions of dollars. I am not in the slightest surprised at the success of this Kickstarter again, of this crowdfunding campaign. I don't know that I would have predicted close to 3 million in 3 or 4 days necessarily, but I'm always really bad at predicting numbers. But I remember when they announced that they were going to Kickstarter in December, there was some discussion. We might have even had that on the Lorecast. I can't remember, but some discussion of like, oh, that's interesting. That's typically not a great time to go to Kickstarter because people have other concerns. Not only did that not seem to hurt them in the slightest, but that, it hasn't even slowed them down, it seems, which is great.
Well, I actually have some answers regarding that. So it sounds like basically the way that things lined up with final sort of shippings for Flea Mortals, and then the release of, they did an updated Illrigger. So they had a lot of MCDM releases kind of coming up in the lead up to December. And so even though December is typically not the time you want to go for, the idea of waiting a month and letting everything cool down and losing that momentum, the trade-off ended up being that they wanted to keep that sort of momentum of being in the forefront of people's minds and people going, hey, I just got this really cool book from them. Yeah, I'll go and, back the next
that makes
thing.
sense. That makes sense. The talent in particular seemed to make a big splash when it hit Tabletop RPG Twitter in particular.
Yeah, I would say that all of MCDM's classes, I think with the exception of the Illrigger, have filled in a very sort of open niche in 5e design, right? Beastmaster, what was it called? The Beastheart. Beastheart, James Introcasso's Beastheart fills the oft maligned Beastmaster role. The talent is obvious. People seem to love psionics, and there is just really nothing for it coming out of Wizards other than a few, I don't know, unspecial subclasses. Is that too mean? There's nothing particularly swanky about them. They exist. Yeah, I do want to check out the Illrigger. It seems pretty neat, but I don't think there are many people clamoring to play an evil paladin. Don't hear that online very often.
Sure. And then just worth mentioning, I suppose, there's been analysis done on this on Twitter already, people breaking down kind of the MCDM model, what has led to this astronomical success. And obviously it's no single thing, but just, a combination of presence, a timing, but also fantastic work, which builds up an incredibly strong reputation in the industry, where folks, it's not just, it's the fact that if somebody works on an MCDM product, if somebody's worked on Arcadia or worked on Flea Mortals, they are clamoring to talk about it on social media, which I think, that is a level of, I don't even know what to call it, because I'm not saying this cynically, right? Like, I'm saying this like genuinely. They've built up such a great reputation that's something you can't buy, that sort of reputation. So this has been, as Matt said in a recent video, not just 8 years in the making, but long before that in the making. So congratulations to them.
Huge congrats. And I feel like I feel like I'm becoming like the MCDM spokesperson today, but it's just because I'm excited.
No, that is Pathfinder and MCDM. Those are the two roles in mythology. Those are the roles that
and
you
contracts.
fulfill. And contract law, yeah.
But I mean, no, genuinely, it is one of my greatest prides that both you, when bringing me onto this podcast, and Matt, when bringing me on to do the Q&A, both of you said, we need someone who's not going to just be nice. Which, make of that what you will. But no, it's such a combination of things. I think very few people are in the position to begin with that Matt was in order to launch this thing, like MCDM as a whole, because it came down to, all these years of industry experience, not only in tabletop RPGs, but also in video games. He when he, makes his own products, he knows artists, he knows writers, he knows, all these people that he can bring in and get excited about a thing. And I think that is also a big key element, is that they make stuff that they're excited to make. And they're less concerned with, market trends, which is cool, because it means, I remember when they were first showing the art for the talent, I remember Matt saying, look, you're going to look at this art and you're going to know instantly whether this is something you think is cool or whether it's something you're not interested in at all. Sure. And both of those things are fine. But they just pick a direction and they go with it. And I think that really works in a way, because even though you're maybe not getting the broadest audience that you could possibly get. You're getting a really passionate audience, and that it makes a massive
that's
difference.
something that we've talked about at Ghostfire, right? Is the idea of broad audience versus engaged audience, and what can lead to a more successful product, or a more successful project. In terms of like the audience's fanaticism for that thing. And look, I'll be honest, I don't think from having played it, and I there's things that the MCDM role-playing game, from what I know about it, do that I really like. I really like the idea that your resources continually kind of recharge and spend and recharge and spend. I like that gameplay loop, because even playing Baldur's Gate, I feel frustrated at like getting into a fight that's a little bit more difficult than I thought it would be. And the fight's not hard, but now I got to take a long rest, right? Like that's a frustrating gameplay loop sometimes. That being said, how specific the MCDM RPG seems to me in what they're trying to accomplish, a heroic fantasy, power fantasy in some capacity, is not what I'm looking for in my like every week kind of D&D or tabletop RPG game. I think it's the sort of game I definitely want to play a campaign in for like maybe 2 to 6 months, but will inevitably return to, something like Grim Hollow, which is much more my wheelhouse. All of that to say, I agree with what you're saying and 100% respect the fact that they know what they're making and they are making that thing, which is very evidenced in it.
Worth noting, the other thing that Ghostfire and MCDM as companies have in common is that they both pay their writers quite well.
Yeah. On the topic of audiences, engaged audiences, highly evangelical audiences, it's the thing that really impresses me about MCDM is how well moderated their community is. I'm not part of the MCDM Discord. I don't see their community moderation in action, but I can see the knock-on effect as it spills into other communities, right? I've been deeply involved in the Critical Role community as a professional and as a fan for many, many years. And as much as I love that show, as much as I love the creatives involved in it, that community has some problems when it comes to people disliking the thing that they like. And, I've seen that a little bit in MCDM, but I don't see people kind of going hunting for opinions that will make them mad and that will, kind of incite their righteous fury.
They don't need to go looking.
The mods shut down any conversation about Ben Byrne.
Really?
No, that makes it sound so much worse than it was. Everyone was actually being fair. I think it's funny to make it sound really bad, but it was fine. But the mods did rescue you.
Ooh, thank you, MCDM mods.
Persona non grata in the MCDM community, Ben Byrne.
Cool. We'll just stay out of that Discord, especially because of the way that Discord announces your arrival when you fall into a Discord. That would be fun to watch. I feel.
Wizards of the Coast went through this a while back when they had DDI back 4th edition days. They realized what they were doing was they were creating forums to host people that were just bashing them, and it just doesn't make any sense to carry the weight of the hate for you around. So it makes sense for a company to do that. So, good on them. Good on them for cultivating the kind of audience that they need to survive.
Because it's like people are going to hate you no matter what. They can do it somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like the MCDM Discord. In my case. No, but genuinely, congratulations to them. I'll be very fascinated to see where this ends up, at what point.
Also worth mentioning that you all brought up Kickstarter as or crowdfunding as not pre-ordering. And I think that is very much the philosophy that we're encouraging here with the MCDM game crowdfunding is you're funding the process of making the game more than anything else. So,
yeah. And if you do that, if you are going to do that, then you do need to do what Matt and James do, which is talk through the process, because people are paying as much to see the process as they are paying for the final product. So in that sense, they do a great job. If you are using that platform as just a sales channel, then you sort of have less ability to do that because a lot of times the game has already been designed.
Dael, do you know when the backer kit finishes?
It's a month after, so it'll be probably the 2nd of January-ish. January 5th. Oh, okay. There we go. Thank you.
January 5th, yep.
I'm putting that in the back of my mind, but maybe in the forefront of yours. I'm not sure. Anyway, speaking of things in the forefront of our mind and shifts within the tabletop RPG industry, PAX Unplugged. There was a 50 Years of D&D Adventures panel that occurred at PAX Unplugged. I was at it. It was much like it was on the stream to be there in person. But they talked a couple of things, including descent into the lost caverns of Sarge Kanth, was the way that I believe Chris Perkins effortlessly pronounced it. Or it might have been Jeremy Crawford, I can't quite remember. Vecna, Eye of Ruin, and Quests from the Infinite Staircase, these 3 book releases from next year that are not explicitly tied to the new rules release of next year. Descent into the Lost Caverns of Sarge Kanth specifically being interesting because it is a one-shot that is designed to be played at public events such as conventions with its own scoring system. This feels like is this something relatively new, like from back in the hobby that's being brought back for next year?
Absolutely. They used to have these one-shots at conventions where you would come and either as an individual or usually as a team sit down and play, and there would be a scoring system based on how far you got through the adventure. Other scoring opportunities were there. And then sometimes there would be different rounds. So if you won the first round, you would move to the second round. A lot of the old adventures that you have heard of or maybe even played from the past, Tomb of Horrors and White Plume Mountain, and many of those were initially those convention tournament adventures that they then published as a print product. So yeah, they're bringing this back. It'll be interesting to see how it's accepted. There was a time when this was all you played at conventions, and then the idea of a living campaign where you could actually make your own character rather than playing a pre-generated character became all the rage for obvious reasons, because I want to keep playing this character that I made, not some pre-gen. And these sort of classic old tournament adventures fell way, way out of fashion. And so maybe now's the time to bring them back and see how it goes.
Is it really the time to bring them back? I don't think I've seen anything that indicates to me that it's the time to bring them back is the thing. That's why this surprised me.
I think it sounds fun, and that's why it's the time.
I mean, it does sound fun.
Quick vox pop of the Lorecast, and I was going to ask this when we recorded our episode just before, but I'm kind of curious because I think James and I spoke about this at PAX Unplugged. Dael, do you enjoy playing games at conventions?
I do, but I want to clarify that I enjoy playing games outside of conventions more than at conventions. I like playing games at conventions because that's the kind of, I don't know, I'm a social, I don't love like wandering around and shopping at a convention. So I look for those things like panels or games or
I like playing games with my friends. And that can be at conventions. There are a lot of friends of mine who are, all spread across the world in the States. And I enjoy having a couple of strangers in the game and people who I've only met online. Like when we played the MCDM RPG at PAX Oz and Roman was DMing for us. I mean, that was like playing with a friend because we know of Roman from the Lorecast chat and Twitter and from past PAX experiences. But if I'm just going to sit down and play with a group of total strangers, I would probably rather be doing something else.
On the other hand, I once sat down to play a convention game and was playing with Matt Baum, but I didn't know who he was at the time, and now I love his videos.
That's awesome.
I and this might be a slightly different priority for me, being in the industry, but typically when I'm at a convention, there's I have an intense FOMO sometimes of like, I want to go have lunch with this person, or I want to go see that person, or I'm getting messages at this point and want to move over here, or I just want to be mobile. And so when I play games at conventions, generally I'd rather do it over like a 2-hour kind of dip in, dip out, rather than something that goes for too long, because I start to get antsy feet and want to get up and kind of move around. And the other thing is that my experience, like I played Call of Cthulhu at PAX Oz a couple years ago, and I just don't think it was a great introduction to that game specifically. I hunted down Call of Cthulhu because I was like, oh, I'm at a convention. I haven't played this game before. I want to try it out. But the convention floor just, I don't think, lends itself, especially to a newcomer, to the atmosphere that Call of Cthulhu is trying to inherently capture. And it kind of became 5th edition with new rules in terms of atmosphere.
Let me ask you this question one time, and also specifically Shawn, because I know that Shawn has run lots of times at conventions and also outside of conventions. What different, how different is the process of running a game at a convention, and like how do you prep for that? Like, I feel like you understand the question I'm actually asking. My words aren't asking it, but you get it.
Like the difference between running a convention game and running a home game?
In relation to what you're saying, right? Like the scenario doesn't lend itself to the same vibes. So how do you accommodate for that?
What's interesting, and I do want to hear Shawn's answer on this, because, when I was a hired GM, I had a lot of experience running convention games, but I suspect that it pales in comparison to what Shawn has done. But it's interesting that, because I wasn't thinking in terms of running games. If I'm running a game at a convention, I get less of that antsy feet because I'm there for the purpose of running the game. But also when I've run games at conventions, I'm not running dark fantasy. I've never run Grimhollow at a convention yet. But generally when I'm running a convention game, it's Agents of the Empire, or Ethereal Expanse, or it's Forgotten Realms. And so the atmosphere is light and bouncy and like, oh, there's danger. You better get on this thing quick. But it's not trying to bring an atmosphere down here and be like, before you see nothing but the cold void staring back at you through, while no one can hear you because the convention floor is kind of caving in on you. And so I don't know how I would approach a Grimhollow game on a convention floor, but I suspect it wouldn't be a slow horror. It would be something like, a monster is attacking a town and you've got to figure out how to escape whilst that attack is ongoing.
I love them. I hate them. Everywhere in between. But there are so many different factors that go into this, right? I love running convention games because I meet so many different people and I meet so many different play styles, and it taxes in a good way, challenges my skill as a storyteller, as a game master, as a designer, as everything. I love playing. It's exhausting, but I love playing as well, especially playing new games. Learning new games is for the best way for me to, I don't want to watch people play. I want to play and have an expert teach me. When I started running convention games, it was for a living campaign, an organized play campaign, where it was the greatest community of gamers I've ever seen. Everyone was playing the same adventures. Everyone brought their own characters of their own making to this. So every table was different, yet everyone got a chance to experience the same overarching story, but come at it in different ways. So I learned so much about storytelling and player types and all of those things. So that's one thing. I also love sitting down with pre-generated characters at a very specific feel of an event to give players something that they may never have done before. We are going to play all bards, and we're going to see how much fun we have with that. We are going to play a very horror-centric game, much more than you might get at your home game, with these very specific characters for this very specific reason. when I ran the Aurora stuff at GameholeCon. It was, here's the pre-generated characters. See how they're built? The players that were interested in the story were interested in the story of Aurora. The players that were interested in mechanics were like, okay, let me reverse engineer how you built this character. Oh, I see. There are no species in this. Everything is built by hand. Oh, cool. What does this mean? What does that mean? And we got to discuss that a little bit. Is it hard to do? It's very hard to do. Is it worth it? For me, it was definitely worth it, and I would not give those 20-some years back. And I will be going to conventions again this year and doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, I just, the reason to take that little detour is I think, James, you were the one asking the question as to whether, sorry, I'll bring the name up in front of me, the Descent into the Lost Caverns of Saj Kanth is something that kind of the community are crying out for. And I think it, honestly, I don't think that I'll be going and playing the Legends of the Descent into the Cave, the Saj Kanth adventure.
We got to talk about naming conventions. I, for a very long time, have been keeping a list of Wizards of the Coast adventure names and complaints about them, because I feel like we're so close to good things all the time, and it's always a bad name. So, okay, I think that there needs to be like an action noun. And descent feels like it should, you're descending. Okay, sure.
Oh, you're not, okay, yeah.
But I'm talking about like the types of words we're using broadly, because it's like, yes, an actionable noun, that's great. Siege, right? Heist. These are good words. Dragon Heist is a great name. It's just unfortunate that it doesn't describe what was happening, but it's a great name because you get a fantasy word, but a word that they recognize, all right? So Saj Kanth doesn't work because it's a fantasy word, but it's also a word that no one knows. It's made up. It doesn't mean anything. But dragon, unicorn, spells, magic, any of these words, great words. Actionable nouns that have a little oomph to them, great words.
Well, given that Descent into the Lost Caverns of Sojkanth is based off of the D&D adventure Lost Caverns of Sojkanth, it seems very clear what they're trying to inspire with this name, which is people who love Lost Caverns of Sojkanth. And that's why the word Sojkanth
in that category are there.
And we're going to take it one step further. There was also an adventure called Descent into the Depths of the Earth. So this is a mashing of those two things. Descent into the Lost Caverns.
Well, I'm against it.
Yeah,
whatever it is,
and you are right to be against it. you are correct.
As Roman just said in the chat, that's right. Dael for naming the MCDM RPG.
Yes. And there's the proof.
Descent in the pudding into the depths of MCDM.
No, I feel like it'll just be called like Monster Murder or something like that if Dael names it. Just like, strong noun, strong verb.
No faith in me.
Monster, that's exactly what you just described.
You're not wrong. Murder is a pretty good actionable noun.
Unicorn slaughter. Woo! Let's do it.
They've also talked Quest into the Infinite Staircase, which is an anthology of classic adventures.
That's a pretty good name.
Brought back quests from the Infinite Staircase. You like that?
I don't like the from, but I like Quest and I like Infinite Staircase.
I think Quest of the Infinite Staircase is a better name, but it might not describe what's going on.
I feel like now you all need to write numbers from 0 to 9 on cards so that we can get scores for each of these names as they get read out.
I used to have that somewhere for ranking your segues.
The Infinite Staircase was an adventure from Planescape back in the day, and it is yet another way to move. It's another way to move in between the planes. So
surprised I didn't know that.
From the Infinite Staircase makes logical sense, if not marketing sense.
Yeah, I know of the Infinite Staircase from WebDM, and that's literally the only place where I've heard of it.
The Infinite Staircase.
But it seems cool. Again, going back and pulling back adventures from the history of the game, similar to Tales from the Yawning Portal, is what they seem to suggest that would be. But with new secrets and new characters kind of sprinkled in there. They had a character on screen that they refused to reveal the identity of. So we will find out who that is. But apparently a new character, not an old favorite. And then the Vecna, Eye of Ruin.
Actually, Ben, it's Eve of Ruin.
Sorry, you're right.
Get your Eves checked.
Well, I'm glad that it's Eve of Ruin because I was about to give it some quippy subtitle. Eye of Ruin, Hand of destruction or something. Eve of Ruin being a multiverse spanning adventure, revisiting places already appeared in 5e as well as places that are yet to appear in 5e from D&D's history. This panel, they didn't make a secret of it. It was 50 years of adventures, 50 years of the hobby. And so a lot of their products next year seem to be themed around the past and the future, looking back and looking forward. Are we looking forward to any of these in particular?
The Vecna adventure sounds great, man. Speaking of titles, I really like its title.
The Vecna is actually called Eye of Ruin, Hand of Destruction.
What?
Is it really?
No.
Of my brain melting out my eye sockets.
Eye of Vecna. Come on now.
No, I know. That's why I added that.
You thought that you just accidentally came up with the exact title? You said that before.
I did, yeah.
This is all gone wrong.
No, you're far from the only person who's called it Eye of Ruin, though, Ben. I think probably because of the influence of the Eye of Vecna.
Right.
And the fact that a V looks a tremendous amount like a Y. I'll bet people will be calling it Eye of Ruin for years to come if this adventure is popular in any capacity. I hope it is.
Spleen of trepidation.
Hairpiece of despair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm really curious about what this Vecna adventure is actually going to be, though, right? If Infinite Staircase is Planescape, and we know the Planescape is going to play a larger scape role in the 2024 core books, then it sounds like they may be going all in on multiplanar stuff. And Vecna seems to be a good candidate for getting up to some multiplanar shenanigans.
And then speaking of multiplanar shenanigans, the Player's Handbook and the Monster Manual, they did talk about the DMG as well, but that kind of bounced off me because it's the book I'm least interested in. Talking about the Player's Handbook, 48 subclasses, 4 subclasses for each class, so no more misbalance there. Although, I'm just realizing this now. Aren't there like 10 domains for the cleric in the 2014?
There's so many.
So are they cutting back on domains?
But
They've
also
cut
8 wizard schools.
Yeah, there's only going to be 4 wizard schools from the 8 in 2014.
Wow.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah, okay. That did not click in my brain until right now. I had been thinking the opposite. I was like, oh,
do we
great,
know
we'll
who's
get more
getting
than
the axe?
No, I don't think they've said.
I think they should just
said
have
it for
4.
wizards.
We should make up 4 right now.
We should make up 4 and give them different names.
Right. Like the saliva domain.
I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
James, what domain are you hoping for?
Oh, the eyeball domain.
Mm-hmm. Obviously.
Great.
Cool.
Optically, yeah.
I'll go for woodworking.
I'm going to go for the YouTubers domain.
That's a very, very dark place.
We've
The
got
SEO
School of
optimized
Swirlies
domain.
and School of Rock in chat.
School of Rock. Nice. Jeez,
That'll be a
domain.
good one.
Nice.
One thing that they kind of harped on about is the art refresh. I mean, the art that they've shown off looks really, really beautiful.
Mhm.
They want to make sure every class has a full page art, and then every subclass has art this time, so that you really get an idea in your head
That's nice.
of what
That's
these
real
subclasses may stereotypically look like.
Here's the thing. When I saw the 2014 Player's Handbook, I was wowed by it being basically the most beautiful RPG book I'd ever seen. And these days, I think it looks a bit rinky-dink. And Wizards cannot afford that.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting. Yeah, because like looking at old, like I look at I think I've got a 4th edition or it might be a 3rd edition Monster Manual. I'm not sure, maybe a 4th. But I open that and there is art in there, but none of it is like full page spread or anything. And it is so dense with text that I find it kind of impenetrable. There's not like there are stat blocks, but they're not like, nicely laid out and defined as to where they exist on the page. They kind of all run together a little bit. So, I think going further down the readability path is a good thing. You get your money's worth with the art.
If you look at
except for
any free
backgrounds.
league game, right? Any free league game or something coming out of there, those are some of those gorgeous game books you've ever seen. I think WotC wants to do something like that.
Yeah, for sure. For the background art, they have backgrounds was literally the phrase they used. They were like, for each background has an art piece, but it has no focus of it. It's just a background. So that you can imagine that's where your character might have come from, which somebody online said looked like placeholder art. But thematically, I like the pun, so sure.
When I worked with Wizards on a project and I saw some of the art direction behind the curtain stuff, they said that the most valuable type of artwork to them and the most highly praised type of artwork from the player base was landscape illustrations, landscape and format, landscape and subject. And that's the sort of thing they're doing for the background art. And I think it's interesting that it's being criticized because even as early as a year or two ago, that's what their reports said are the most well-liked pieces of art in their books.
I suppose that's because, and again, this goes to the philosophy of why they're doing background art for backgrounds. It's the least defined, like when you see a fighter, the artwork for the fighter, in many ways that defines what a fighter is in folks' minds, even though that's not necessarily the intention for that to be the only thing a fighter can be. And even with their subclass art, while I think it's fantastic to provide art for every subclass so that folks get an idea in their mind's eye of how the creators envisaged this thing, I also hope that that doesn't lead to players kind of feeling stuck in playing a subclass in a way that is reflective of that art. I'm a huge fan of kind of using the mechanics but breaking the mold of what the class actually is suggesting it is.
Taking a descriptivist approach to character design than a prescriptivist approach. Yes.
Right. You might just say. Every monster in the Monster Manual getting a tune-up. So they will have the same CR, but their stats will be increased to better live up to their CR. An expanded NPC section. Yes, please. I love NPC stat blocks in my games. And that's all I've got in my notes.
The Murder of the Tarrasque would be a good adventure name.
Okay. Well, speaking of murdering things, they murdered the release dates they initially put out for each of these books. I was sitting at the panel, as I said. I checked my phone like 5 minutes before the end of the panel as it seemed like they were wrapping up and looked at Twitter. And there was an artwork there of the Player's Handbook fighter art that they'd shown off with a release date, which was May 21st. And I remember passing my phone to Matt, who was sitting near me, and just saying, check the date, which I thought was interesting. That's a very early release date, but also very cool that we'll have these books kind of earlier in the year. But it was not to be. As it seems like someone either jumped the gun or published the wrong art or some such, and those release dates were promptly deleted, never to be seen again at time of recording.
How long did it take between posting and removal? Do we know?
To my memory, like minutes, like 5-10 minutes. But I think I read in an article it might have been closer to hours. So maybe I just couldn't find it when I went looking for it again.
Very funny.
And luckily, once something's on the internet, you can take it down fairly easily.
And no one will have noticed. It's fine.
You never know. Never know.
It's not like they're going to talk about it on all the news podcasts. I mean, calm down.
I mean, look, I think they've mentioned. Actually, I don't know if they have, but they. So I don't want to speculate wildly. But May would be early from. Especially as we just had our last playtest packet and they've got to finalize the rules that they want to do, go through that playtest feedback, and then lock text before it goes to printing to print all these books that don't have enough printers for, famously reported earlier in the year. So May, I'm not surprised if that date has been shifted a little bit later in the year. May would be great. Honestly, earlier the better from a fan perspective, but we shall see. Speaking of being a fan, Baldur's Gate 3 sweeps the Game Awards, winning Game of the Year, Best RPG, Best Multiplayer, Best Community Support, Best Performance by Neil Newborn, who played Astarion, and Player's Voice Award, which was voted on by the public. Did anybody watch the Game Awards?
This is a great topic, Ben, but let's wrap it up.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about too, James. There's a really great YouTube video by Burback, is the YouTube channel. Eddie Burback's like alt channel with his brother, where they go through probably a deeper dive into the history of the Video Game Awards than you'd necessarily want, and kind of ends on a positive note to where the Game Awards ended up last year. I feel like the end of that video would end differently if they had seen the Game Awards this year, just because award ceremonies are always caught between needing to make sense financially to put on this big party, but also celebrate the thing they're there to celebrate. And poor Neil Newborn, who was, making a statement about how Baldur's Gate has reached so many people of so many different identities who didn't feel seen before, while music played over the top of him and "Please Wrap It Up" was on the teleprompter, is a little heartbreaking.
Neil Newborn was going to quit acting. If he got that job right when he was at his breaking point, and for him to rocket to this level of recognition and success, right, from his darkest moment to the highest apex, is such a beautiful sort of protagonistic moment that, to see people who seem more interested in corporate advertising than giving the people who make these games their flowers at an event ostensibly all about giving them their flowers, it just seems sad.
Yeah.
And it makes you think as well of I don't mean to give the impression that the Oscars are perfect by any means, but it you do get this template from the Oscars where it's like they pick and choose. They're like, all right, we're going to allot more time for these categories to give their speeches because they've got their corporate sponsors. They got to make their ad breaks. They got to make their time. But also we know that people are going to want to hear this person speak. Whether their choices are, perfect or imperfect or whatever, but it does mean that you don't cut off Kei Kwan in the middle of his beautiful emotional speech. You know what I mean? And it's, it's just, I don't know. The logistics do better.
Yeah, it makes it like, you understand that the VGAs, the Spike Video Game Awards, if you want to go down that Burback video, if you want to go down a road of sickeningly offensive material from the Video Game Awards of the past, they're not even comparable to the Keeley Awards of present day. But it is just what's so I understand the need for corporate sponsorship. I understand the need for video game trailers. It's actually fun that the Video Game Awards are also an opportunity to learn about what's coming next year and seeing those trailers. But, I'm sort of speaking a little bit off the cuff here, but from my understanding, is a dog getting murdered in the background somewhere?
It's downstairs in my apartment, it sounds like.
Okay, cool. Just double checking. Please murder your dogs silently.
Dante.
Oh, if I was unpopular before.
Listen, it's just the abattoir downstairs. It happens all the time.
My understanding is that 8 minutes was given to Hideo Kojima to come out and talk about a game in the most vague terms that has not even really been fully announced yet. Its name is as uncertain as the MCDM RPG. It's just a collection of letters. And that was given more airtime at the award ceremony than actually celebrating those who won this year individually is a little bit.
And you got to think as well, because a big part of this comes down to the decision to broadcast the awards. Because, there are lots of industries that have their awards nights, your dentistry awards night or whatever, that we don't broadcast because it's not that interesting.
Sure.
We're dealing with an industry that is really on the border between people being interested and wanting to pay attention to it and then wanting to broadcast and feed into that, but also not necessarily being able to afford that.
Yeah.
But you got to think that maybe if they didn't broadcast it live, if you just let people post about it online, I think that maybe you could get away with giving people the time that they deserve and not having to be so beholden to ads. And maybe it'd be worthwhile. Just get pretty pictures. Have a nice social media team posting on all the socials.
And yet, video games as an industry makes more money annually than Hollywood.
I know!
Which is why it's so strange that video games seem so insecure about its legitimacy as a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe in some ways I'm sort of just parroting, things that I've read online about what folks have mentioned, but it rings true. Having like Timothée Chalamet just rock up out of nowhere and just be like, oh yeah, here's this game award, and just like, all right, thanks, Tim.
What
video game were you in?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's the distribution of where all the earnings go to. It's
Poor Al Pacino forced to stand through 8 minutes of Kratos' speech last year.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, that was great. But it was great to see. I'm so sorry, I can't remember the actor's name off the top of my head, but it was so great to see Kratos come back to give the award to Neil for this year. That was, if nothing else, a great moment to see how video games are elevating themselves into the art form that they've always been.
Well-deserved winnings.
All round. Speaking of things that are not well-deserved, yeah, this is going to be, I'm so sorry, this is going to be a little bit of a breakneck segue here, or a breakneck in tone. And this is breaking news, so I am not in and out of the nuances of this, so I apologize. But it is just being reported Hasbro laying off employees in an SEC filing up to, they've already laid off 800, and it looks like they may be laying off another 1,000 employees.
It's a bad day for toys, a bad year for toys. People aren't buying plastic toys in the way they once were. Yeah.
I don't know that I have a lot more to because you're right. Sorry, just quickly, James, into what you were saying is that Hasbro's earnings as a company were down despite D&D's earnings being higher in third quarter, which is a shame. But I don't know that I really want to comment too much on the particulars of this, except to say that hopefully those people land safely.
Yeah, I do briefly want to comment because there's been a lot of layoffs in broader gaming as well.
Oh, it's been Armageddon in video games.
And and it always seems to happen just before Christmas. I mean, it happens plenty of other times too, but it's particularly hard that it hits people right before the holidays, and it just sucks to see.
Yes, so best of luck and well wishes to anybody affected by those layoffs. Kind of hard to come back from that to a listener email. Maybe we just pinch it off there for this week.
Yeah. If you want an awards ceremony that doesn't suck, see, I'm good. I've got the segue. Then you can join us next week.
Do the outro.
I don't know how to do the outro.
Take it away.
I'm so out of my depth. Wait. I've got this. Okay. If you want an awards ceremony that's good, you should join us next week for the Ellies, the Eldritch Lorecast Awards for Excellence in 2023. And that will be, are we doing the thing that we did last time where we recorded it before this, but it might be streamed at the regular time next week, which is, let me see if it's 4 p.m. East Coast. It's, what time are you? 7 p.m.? Something like that. West Coast, 6. Okay, great.
You're muted, James.
3 p.m. West Coast USA on Monday, 7 p.m. East Coast, or 6 p.m. East Coast USA on Monday.
If I thought about how time works, I might have been okay, but
10 a.m.
This is such a disaster.
Tuesday.
We can't even.
10 a.m. Tuesday.
You're both scrapped.
Eastern.
Shawn, take over.
I have been Ben Byrne here with James Hake, Bill Kingsmill, and some other guy. We will see you next time.
Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba.
Enjoy your holidays, everyone.
Merry happy.
Very happy.
50 more seconds.
50 more seconds of vamping.